Alexis McKinney. I am actually a professor in recreational therapy at Temple University, so I'm pretty far out of my realm here. And I was just sort of on the side joking with Erin about that. So I anticipate learning a lot from you all today and appreciate that. So first of all, today, as you all know, we are discussing environmental issues and outdoor recreation. Oh, before we get started though, just want to acknowledge that we do have these sponsoring organizations, including the Australian, New Zealand Association for Leisure Studies, Canadian Association for Leisure Studies, China International Leisure Research Association, Leisure Studies Association, Sociology of Leisure, the Academy of Leisure Sciences, and World Leisure Organization. Hopefully in the near future, we'll be adding the American Therapeutic Recreation Association. Our four panelists today include Jinyang Deng, Jeff Rose, Sandro Carnicelli, and Mandy Baker. I'll be asking two questions, and in the order that I just introduced each one of these individuals, I'll ask that they respond to the questions. All right, so let me get out of that. Get to the questions. All right, starting with Jinyang. First of all, what are the most pressing environmental issues in your region, and how do they affect outdoor recreation in North America, Europe, China, Australia, and New Zealand? And the second question for all of you, starting with Jinyang, will be what are the new cutting-edge trends in environmental issues and outdoor recreation in the leisure literature in North America, Europe, China, Australia, and New Zealand? I will turn it over to you all.
Okay, so thanks, Alex. So let me kick off first. So in terms of press environmental issues, like in the United States, particularly in those eastern regions where I live, I think fracking and coal mining could be the two that we cannot avoid when we talk about outdoor recreation. So some of you may not familiar with fracking. I have an image to share and to show you how it works. So let me share image. Okay. So basically, fracking is a method or process that injects high pressure water along with sand and chemicals down the wellbore vertically and horizontally to fracture the rock formations to get oil and gas extracted from the rock. So and then bring it back, connected on the surface. So this kind of economic activity is super controversial. So not just in the US, but also in Canada, in Europe, in China, and Australia, of course, and many other countries. So it's good for economy, for energy security and energy independence, but it's bad for the environment, right? You can say it uses a lot of water, and it can cause groundwater contamination, air quality degradation, land and habitat disruption, noise pollution, and even linked to seismic activities, which means it can cause earthquake. So the major formation, let me show you here. The Marcella Shale is the major rock formation in North Eastern region. This map shows the distribution of the natural shale gas well in the Appalachian Basin. You can see almost everywhere we got the gas well, right? Move here in Pennsylvania and the entire West Virginia. Some in New York, Maryland, Virginia, and Tennessee. So now, what are the major impacts on recreation and tourism? So I outlined several from the literature. Damage on destination image and brand, impact on accessibility and usage of the public lands, and the impact on water level and the quality. So it can affect the quality of the streams and also affect the quality of life of fish, right? Not just quality of life of a human being, but also affect quality of life of aquatic life species. Lower the disturbance of visitor experience, so from fracking operation, and visitor avoidance of recreational sites with fracking. So visitors may choose to visit another places. And then finally, the boom and the bust cycles of economic activities. So local restaurants and hotels may get some benefits in the short term because we got the workers moving to the area. So now, in terms of coal mining, the impact on outdoor recreation is also multidimensional, like similar to fracking. So like coal mining, particularly mountaintop removal mining, can also contaminate water and reduce the richness and abundance of aquatic species downstream. So as reported in this study, I found from Nature Sustainability. So this image shows the mountain top removal mining on the impact on the valley fuel. This is a kind of a runoff of the valley fuel. You remove the top of the mountain, you dump the rock, the earth to the valley. You create some problem like runoff here. Also impact on those aquatic species downstream. So this statistical across West Virginia or Appalachian region, so it's a ubiquitous phenomenon. So coal mining can directly or indirectly affect the visitors' perception of the destination image, right, and recreation experience on water-related activity, fishing, whitewater rafting. That's very popular in West Virginia. So, so I want to take this opportunity to promote like whitewater rafting activity, the tourism industry in West Virginia. So, but the whitewater industry, whitewater rafting industry has been hit hard by the coal mining. So back to 2014. So when 10,000 gallons of chemical get poured into the river, it's called Oak River here. So 300,000 residents get affected in 9 counties downstream. So about 60 miles away, we have several whitewater rafting companies located here. So the Oak River, where the chemical spill happened, actually flow northwest and join the Kanawha River, go this way. So New River is run north and then join over here. So actually, something happened right downstream cannot impact activities upstream over here, but the people still perceive it's not safe to do whitewater rafting upstream over here. So what's the economic loss? About a drop, like a in Balkan, about 7% drop in Balkan could be a result of this kind of a chemical spill. So I have time to talk more. Okay. Now, in I want to say something about the smog or haze impact in China, because I think fracking and coal mining, right, everywhere, as I mentioned, Australia, Canada, China, but relatively, it seems haze or smog has caught more attention domestically and internationally. So, based on the literature and also help from my Chinese colleagues, so they helped me to get some information. They're gonna be prepared for this webinar. So I get something like this. So smog can create like negative impact on destination image, reduce inbound tourism, and reduce like outdoor recreation participation and increase indoor activities. It can cause people to cancel their travel plan or choose a different place to visit due to concerns over health risks. And the impaired visibility can affect transportation and sightseeing that may create more like a traffic accident. So basically, I talk about a little bit fracking, coal mining, and haze in America, and particularly in those eastern region, and also in China. So this is my answer to the first question.
All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Now, so you want me to continue for the second question?
Yeah, if you'd like to, go ahead, and then I'll pass it over to Jeff as soon as you finish that up. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of literature on the impact like fracking, coal mining, and haze on outdoor recreation, I found literature is very limited. So particularly for fracking and coal mining, I did a search, Web of Science, so using fracking and outdoor recreational tourism as a topic. I only got 7 papers. 3 of them are co-authored by Dr. Michael Ferguson, a graduate alumni of our program, and now a faculty with the University of New Hampshire. So there are 23 papers on the impact of haze or smog on outdoor recreation and tourism, but most in the context of China, particularly the capital city, Beijing. In terms of coal mining, none would publish it on its impact on recreation or tourism. So there are a number of studies on the use of abundant sites or reclamation for recreation and tourism. So this search may not be comprehensive and inclusive as one of my papers involving coal mining and natural gas extraction and impact on outdoor recreation opportunity spectrum classification for the whole state of West Virginia. And several papers by my colleagues, like Dr. Robert Bones and Chad Pierce Galler, were not found from the search of the Web of Science. And I believe there are many other articles not included in the database or their publication in language other than English or in other databases. But that said, this search can provide a glimpse of the state core of research in this area. So in USA, studies on fracking and its impact on outdoor recreation were largely focused on the Appalachian Basin and centered around Pennsylvania. So these studies can be broadly classified into 2 groups: impact on recreation resource and impact on visitors in terms of their experience, behavior, perception, or attitude. So studies have used primary data like on-site survey, online survey, and combined online and mere back survey or secondary data, like a national visitor use monitoring program data to study visitors or residents at different scales, local, state, regional, national. And for example, in a statewide survey, Dr. Ferguson and his associates from Penn State found about 1/4 of respondents had encountered shale gas development when participating in outdoor recreation. And nearly 15% of respondents reported having changed their behavior. So this stated behavior change was confirmed by another study based on empirical observation that within 5-kilometer radius, each individual oil or gas will result an annual decline of 6 visits to the site. So less visits means less economic benefits. So there is opportunity cost for recreation. Or there are winners, right? There are also losers. Okay. So in terms of the hate impact on recreation or tourism in China, so there are studies that look at the impact on image, intention to visit, destination preference or destination switch, and for international tourism, like inbound, outbound, and domestic tourism. So units of analysis for domestic tourism ranges from scenic spots within the same city to a number of cities across the country using questionnaire survey data, online survey, pilot data, and big data. So basically, studies in China more focus on quantitative examination of the economic loss because of the hate. But in USA, we more kind of focus on like a perception or the impact on a visitor experience. So basically, I got some understanding based on a search of the literature from the Web of Science. Now we can open for a discussion. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. Jeff, would you like me to repeat the questions?
Sure.
All right, we started with what are the most pressing environmental issues in your region and how do they affect outdoor recreation in North America, Europe, China, Australia, and New Zealand? And then the second question being, what are the new cutting edge trends in environmental issues and outdoor recreation in the leisure literature in North Carolina, Europe, China, Australia, and New Zealand, or where you can speak to, of course.
Great, thanks so much. So what I was thinking about, I kind of took a little bit of a different tact than Dr. Dang. And I think one of the biggest and emerging notions in environmentalism is that environmental justice cannot and should not be separated from issues of social justice. So this is an integrative and intersectional perspective that has really long been espoused by organizations from both environmental justice and social justice approaches. But this openly integrative approach is gaining traction in mainstream publications and media and academic discourse as well. So with that being said, I think one of the biggest environmental issues in North America, in the United States more specifically, is our ongoing movement for racial justice. This movement is exemplified by the very public protests that we're seeing throughout the United States through the summer of 2020, which was sparked by the highly publicized, open and unapologetic murder of George Floyd in Minnesota, but also followed a long, although fairly recent line of incidents, similar incidents involving police and extrajudicial murders in places like Georgia, Ohio, Kentucky, and probably lots of other places as well. And for folks who are paying attention, I think these deaths of people of color at the hands of police officers were not necessarily new, but they were captured on camera and subsequently just, disseminated online. And it really strengthened the attention that has been given to mainstream populations to this issue. And so what's emerged, among many other things, from this summer of racialized discontent is the beginning of a coherent idea that various oppressions that might be reflected through race, through gender, through sexual orientation, through educational access, maybe other areas as well, are deeply intertwined with issues of despoiling the environment and geographic or spatial segregation of environmental amenities or disamenities. So one of the new and I would say exciting ideas that's being considered in outdoor recreation in the United States is the idea that outdoor recreation areas, which we often refer to as park and protected areas or park and protected area management, are not seeing themselves as passive or uncomplicated or even apolitical providers of the public good. So outdoor recreation as a public good is necessarily at least partially responsible for the equitable distribution of who receives these public goods of outdoor recreation. How this distribution might be conducted in a manner that accounts not only for historical exclusions and historical marginalizations, but contemporary exclusions and contemporary marginalization as well. So outdoor recreation then, I think, really needs a pretty thorough unpacking, at least in the United States, and perhaps a reconsideration of what it is, what it could be, what it should be as well. It might be worth thinking what we mean by outdoor recreation. When I teach this stuff to students and I ask them what outdoor recreation is, what it looks like, they often evoke imagery of amazing, adventurous activities taking place in usually far-flung, often distant wilderness areas. So they'll talk about things like skiing in the Wasatch or whitewater rafting on the Colorado River, similar to the New River Gorge that we just heard about, or like a climbing trip to the desert or something like that. And I think that's fine because that's often what comes to mind for me as well. And these are often images that are sold to us through commercial advertisements, online videos, community discourse, so on and so forth. But I think a justice-focused approach to outdoor recreation has to really reconsider whose version of the outdoors is being promoted here and whose version of recreation is being promoted. So the outdoors too often is far away, distant, remote, hard to access. And for many people, it's abstract or even just unreal. And I think this particular conceptualization is unfortunate because the outdoors for most people is actually much closer. It's much more accessible and it's much cheaper and easier to realize and easier to enact. So that prompts me to rethink what we mean by recreation. So adventure and highly skilled, highly equipped, highly financed activities are certainly an activity that takes place during leisure, which is how I define recreation for my students. But we should be really careful not to overly romanticize these activities that are enacted by the privileged few as an ideal to which all other else is judged. So just as the outdoors should be broadened to be more inclusive, more accessible, closer to home, so should recreation as well. So walks on an urban greenway, bike rides in neighborhoods, afternoons in a nearby park should be emphasized and explored and frankly highlighted as well. And so these perspectives where we broaden what we mean by the outdoors, by recreation, and by the combination of them through outdoor recreation are in and of themselves an approach that starts to take seriously ideas of social and environmental justice, where racial concerns of equity, inclusion, and access are really highlighted and promoted. And so I use a book with my students, Carolyn Finney, and she talks about how difficult it is for people of color to have what she calls an uncomplicated relationship with the natural world. And this contested relationship, I think, is playing out in all kinds of interesting ways throughout outdoor recreation. So yes, there are pressing environmental issues affecting the United States. There's no doubt that climate change, wildland forest fires, species loss, probably a host of other environmental issues are affecting outdoor recreation. But the ways in which issues of racial justice affect what outdoor recreation is, what land management agencies are doing to support equitable access to these spaces, and the ways that many of us are participating in outdoor recreation, this is really one of the dominant issues of, well, certainly one of the dominant issues of 2020. And here we are in the first month of 2021. And I guess I, like probably many of you, are really curious to see if these issues are continuing to carry forward. So that's a kind of quick overview of some thoughts that I have around integrating social justice and environmental justice into the study of outdoor recreation. And maybe I'll pass the mic and I can step back in on new or cutting edge trends after we hear from some other folks as well.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Jeff. I'm going to turn it over to Sandro. Yeah, I know. I did the unmute thing this time.
Okay, so thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you all and connect, even if online, to you all. It's quite late here in Scotland, so I apologize if I look tired, but it's over 9 o'clock in the evening. And it's very nice to see, obviously, Jin Yang talking about some of the economic actions and the impact of some of the economic actions, such as fracking or coal mining, into the outdoor recreation and environmental issues, and see Jeff brilliantly explaining some social issues and the aspect of social justice and the importance to environment. I would like to take you to a little bit more a different path, which is a little bit more of the ecological crisis that we have nowadays, and how we cannot actually dissociate the issues with climate change that we have nowadays with outdoor recreation. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we have here in Scotland. As I said, I think I said before, I'm Brazilian. I could talk a lot about Brazil, but I will refrain to do that, and I'll concentrate on the country that I've been living for over 10 years now. So obviously Scotland has the aim to achieve carbon zero target by 2045. We are working towards that. And some of the easy steps towards achieving carbon zero targets have been taken, trying to reduce cars and use more electric cars and things like that. But obviously, like 50% of the energy consumed in Scotland comes from houses and heating houses and places. So there's a whole movement now towards decarbonizing homes, right? But this is just part of a wider problematic of climate change and how it's affecting Scotland. I'll get to the point of outdoor recreation. So we've seen like climate change impacting Scotland in many different ways. Increase in wildfires. We have a huge wildfire here. You may all seen on TV in 2019 in Moray. And we've seen a huge change in some of the biological elements of the country, such as spring events, such as the leaf unfolding or bird migration, eggs laying, and so on. So we've seen a huge impact on some of these elements. We've seen huge issues with salmon, and a lot of these issues with salmon, which you may know that how important is salmon for Scotland, is due to algal or algae and blooms, and a lot of them because of climate change and also pesticide use. So again, a lot of these things, and you can imagine that salmon fishing is one of the outdoor recreation practices that is is quite popular in Scotland, together with other activities such as coastal activities, surfing or kayaking, or skiing in the mountains or hill walking. A lot of Scotland is quite attached to outdoor activities. But as part of that is something of the prices that we are paying for many years of bad practice. So one of the projects that the current government has is to restore the peatlands. So a lot of you have heard about the word peated related to whiskey, and peatlands is an important part of our environment here in Scotland, and there's a huge funding now developed by the Scottish government of over 250 million for the next 10 years to restore the peatlands as an essential contribution to sequestering carbon footprint. So trying to get back those carbon that we put out, but also protecting some of the biodiversity of the country. Scotland is a huge country, as you can imagine, in terms of space. There's like over 11,000 miles of coast, and over 30% of the whole population of Scotland lives in coastal areas. Now, 70% of this population is under the risk of flooding, and that's due to the rise levels of the waters in the country. And you can imagine that has started to have some disruption in many areas of the country with floodings that are more often. So this there is a calculation in terms of some of the work that some of my colleagues on the Royal Academy are doing, that there is between 3 and 4 millimeters of a year of increase in the waters in Scotland, impacting mostly of the north and west part of the country. Having said that, Scotland, as I mentioned to you all, it's it's the Scottish people and people who live in Scotland that are actually going to outdoors and attending outdoor recreation centers, and it's a huge part of our economy. Obviously, this year we've been impacted quite heavily by COVID. A lot of these outdoor recreation centers are struggling. So, and a lot of them, because of the residential characteristics of those outdoor centers, are not being able to open. And I think we promised from the beginning to not talk much about COVID, but that's quite some of the things that has been impacting heavily on this year in terms of the country. So some recent data from Scotland, and the importance of our natural environment, and the importance then to preserve this natural environment and to refresh this natural environment, is that, for example, 57% of people in Scotland have visited some kind of natural park or natural environment or natural area. They visit at least once a month. Over 40% would visit weekly. So, for me and my family here, we would go to, a natural environment or a natural park. We have a moss area here next to our house, basically almost daily. So the links between these natural environments for outdoor recreation and outdoor leisure are quite important for the communities. More than that, if you go to then connect to some of the economic elements, it's believed that outdoor recreation would support 39,000 jobs in Scotland. And again, if you think about if these outdoor jobs are impacted by effects of climate change, as we've been seeing with wildfires and floodings and so on, that's obviously, if we don't protect the environment, we'll clearly have an impact on our economy as well. If you think about snow sports, it's been, if you follow a little bit of snow sports in Scotland, we've been struggling for some years now in terms of the volume of snow we get here. Obviously, we had that beast from the east or something like that they called a couple of years ago. Snow is, apparently, if you talk to people from snow sports, is not as it used to be. So you can start to have clearly changes on the characteristics of snow in Scotland. But the snow sport in itself, they support over 700 jobs in Scotland and has an impact of economic benefit of over 30 million pounds. So again, the importance there of trying to understand the impacts of climate change on the environment of the country and how that would then have a consequence on the outdoor recreation of communities, of living of coastal communities, again, considering the size of the coastal area in Scotland, and the jobs in the outdoor sector as well. So a lot of the work that I've been doing with many parts of research centres and more specifically with the work of the Young Academy of Scotland, that is part of the Royal Society of Scotland, is connected to interdisciplinary work. So if you think about the second question about the literature, a lot of the necessity here is for us to really push for interdisciplinarity in the work with outdoor recreation and outdoor education. Some of the work we are doing is, for example, how climate change is changing the microbiology of rivers. So I work close with a professor from microbiology here who studies amoebas. And so these amoebas that can go into the eyes of people, and if you wear contact lenses, then it can drive you, can make you blind. So and that's the evidence that there are issues of climate change impacting on the water and the development of amoebas in rivers and so on, and how if you are developing an adventure activity such as rafting, you can actually put your clients into danger and things like that. So here it stays my call for people who are studying outdoor education or outdoor recreation to really engage with people from other departments in your university or other universities, and really try to broaden a little bit more the aspect of interdisciplinarity in our field, because what we see now with climate change and environmental issues are complex. They go way beyond economics, they go way beyond social, they involve all of them and way more than that. So it is important that we can expand our field and understand interdisciplinarity more than ever. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandro. And for our final panelists, I'm turning it over to Mandy.
Thank you, Lexi.
You're welcome.
Look, it's hard to follow after these three very eloquent speakers who've kind of covered the ground, and all of these issues obviously are greatly relevant in Australia, New Zealand. I'm speaking a little bit on behalf of New Zealand. I know that New Zealand faces similar issues, although in a very different context. So to add to the pile, I guess that's what I'm going to do, rather than try to like expound on the things that have already been said. To add to the pile, I would talk about the bushfires. I mean, we definitely have faced serious climate change, and we're constantly looking at the impacts of that in our environment. I tend to do my work in the social justice aspect, and then link back into the environmental justice. But agree with you, Jeff; those are interrelated, and I think we do poorly when we exclude them from each other. They are very much wound together. But yeah, the bushfires are probably the most sort of traumatic, pressing issue that we've seen in our environment. I think we made television around the world for a while. I would get calls and emails from family from Canada. I'm Canadian to start with anyway, so that was the first home of many homes. With the fires, and they raged across the eastern coast where the majority of the Australian population live. We are a massive, massive country. We'll beat you, Scotland, easily in land mass, but we don't live in all of that space, obviously, because we have a large desert area in the center and fairly limited population on the eastern coast. I mean, the western coast. The eastern coast, though, is highly populated and is where the bushfires raged and really took over multiple states. I live in the Blue Mountains, which also was very much on fire. And I would talk both of the environmental impact and the social impact. It was scary. It was very anxiety inducing. And because it took over such a huge amount of land mass, a large amount of population are now very anxious about the forests in which they live, or lack thereof at this point. We have had an incredibly wet summer, incredibly wet. Every day I wake up that it's gray and rainy. I'm so happy. We needed the anxious relief. But what it has meant for operations and outdoor recreation is that many, many sites have just burnt to the ground. Equipment and everything. And so small to medium sized operators just can't. They just can't operate. They don't have the money to rebuild. The time to rebuild is costly in itself, but also in that sense of like accessing insurances and being able to get money back in. And it's put lots of people out of work. That's the other part. Combine that horrible summer, and that was our summer, which we have just gone back to school at our end. We quickly moved into COVID. And as you may have heard, similar to New Zealand, our government has been very aggressive in its lockdowns, but we've been highly successful too. So that's meant we've kept the numbers fairly low, and it's meant that we've been able to be mobile and move about. But that being said, in the period of the COVID, and that's the other kind of big issue that we're facing, people started engaging with the outdoors in new ways because of their limitations to engage in any kind of other leisure and recreation or to travel even. The outdoors has become the outdoors, as in the stepping out of your door, which Jeff raised is problematic how we define the notion of outdoors or outdoor recreation. But the sense of being outdoors in terms of stepping out the door and going for a walk or engaging in, like Sandro, the local environments, which in Australia we're quite blessed to be often, scattered within lots of national state forests. That's been taken up in a significant way. But ironically, outdoor education and organized outdoor recreation has been totally shut down. So it further impacted those small to medium, now the large outdoor recreation providers across the country. They couldn't operate. They couldn't have the school camps in. They couldn't see, the senior groups that they saw weekly. Like everything that was group related got shut down. So if you were already in a financial strife and couldn't run your outdoor recreation activity club, all the voluntary groups, all the private profit groups, if you were already there because of the bushfires and had lost kind of the essentials of your site, now you couldn't have the customer base to even begin to think to build. And that means that for the large part, outdoor recreation sectors And when I say that, I'm talking about, well, not just outdoor recreation, I suppose, outdoor education, outdoor recreation, outdoor tourism, outdoor therapies, all of the sectors have seen about a year's worth of close down. It's taken a lot of arguing in a really good way, like constructive arguing and lobbying with the governments to convince the governments that actually outdoor recreation, much like people are engaging in it individually, organized outdoor recreation is actually the best next option, because it was kind of on the, it's a high risk, the perception of high risk. And we've been able to argue actually, no, it's one of the lower risk. And this is one way that we can start to engage socially. Because I think that's one of the remedies we desperately need. This isolation is getting to folks. It's messing with people's heads. It's impacting their family lives. I remember my dad saying, oh my goodness, if you had an abusive family, now you're trapped in the house with those people. And, you know, for how long does this go on for? So, you know, being in the outdoors, we already know the benefits are high for mental and social health. And so being in the outdoors might be a remedy. Let's get some of this organized rec back in there. So yeah, between the bushfires and then the COVID impact, we've watched operators really struggle, and much like you guys have already raised, and Sandra spoke specifically about the loss of employment, the loss of income. And when people lose their roles and their jobs in the outdoors, they often leave sectors. It's not just that they leave the job or they find another organization to work for and they find another tour company, they leave the whole sector. So this has been there's the dogs, sorry. I thought they would be quiet. So this has been a phenomenally challenging time. Sorry, I can see Lexi, you've popped back on. So obviously I've rambled too long. The only thing I would say, I'll add to that is the literature. Oh, sorry, Lexi, I thought that was you signaling.
No, that was just me coming in and out. I'm not cutting you off.
No problem. Well, you can do that. That doesn't bother me. I'm really good at a ramble. The literature, like Jeff, that seems to be the space that I mostly work in, is the questions of justice and equity and inclusion. I come at it from a question of discourses and how people are subjected to those discourses, how that builds to these infrastructures, these whole structures of oppression, of giving some advantage and others not. And I certainly raised the question about, in a lot of the literature that I'm working on, the projects I'm working on, is the question of privilege. The idea of adventure, outdoor adventure. I'm calling it that, Jeff. That's how I deal with it in my head, because outdoor recreation is so problematic. The question of outdoor adventure, or going into remote or non-human, so really, you know, nature-based environments, it is really quite exclusive. It really is exclusive in practice and also in discourse. My partner works in the outdoor gear world, you know, bringing gear into the country. So all those great brands that everyone sort of salivates over, we seem to have sitting around the house. And I'm constantly asking him how the apparel and equipment side of the outdoor experience can change the discourse through the marketing, the way that they present people and images, but even the way they cut the clothes. Like, I honestly, the constant, you know, he's been in this field for almost 2 decades. And every time he brings out home a piece of clothes, I go, I can't get my boobs and hips in it. Does that mean I don't belong in the outdoors? You know, because there is a message in that, you know, even the equipment excludes us. I know, I mean, it's the number of times he's gone off to conferences and talked, unfortunately, about my boobs and hips is probably a little embarrassing. But, you know, that argument that even the equipment excludes, even the clothing excludes. So how do we change it, truly change it in practice, if we can't engage with and really shift some of those things? So that's obviously been burning in me for some time, even before the murder of George Floyd. And I put a call for papers out, and I've had this massive global response. People really want to see something different. They're passionate about the outdoors, and they want to challenge these notions of, you know, who gets access, who has privilege, and how do we make this really truly more inclusive and more just. So I'm happy to say that even though the literature is probably not as substantial as I want it to be right now, give us a year and we will flood you, because we're currently, along with 2 co-editors, Neil Carr from Otago and Emma Stewart from Lincoln in New Zealand, We've been co-editing a triple issue for the Annals of Leisure Sciences on being outdoors. We have 3 issues now. So one of them is actually problematizing the notion of outdoor recreation. Even the idea of it is problematic. And people wrote back. Lots of people had things to say, you know, talking about the urban outdoors as substantial and beneficial. And why do we always exclude those when we talk about outdoors? Because we're thinking remote. We're dealing with gender. And I'm so pleased to see not only are we engaging with questions about women, but we're asking about masculinities as well as gender non-binary notions of gender in the outdoors, and how do we engage with that truly. And the other one is about otherness and othering. And while I'd like to say it's simplistic to say the voices of people of color in the outdoors, but it's so much more dynamic and complex than that. So I guess what I'm saying is watch this space. I know that some of the authors are sitting in the audience, and I'm so pleased. Thanks for joining us. But even the way that they're writing too, that disrupts the notions of a very singular notion of outdoor recreation. And I'm hoping with it that we can start exploring, you know, more broadly and connecting with more folks. Trekking pants are not inclusive. I just saw a message like on the chat. No, trekking pants are not inclusive of all bodies. I mean, the body positivity in the United States, the word fatness is being reclaimed, but the notion that we need to change the body shapes that are included is pretty phenomenal. And I came across that when a woman on Facebook was looking for a harness for larger women so that she could take them high ropes climbing, and she couldn't find it. She couldn't even find a manufacturer that would make it for her. And my heart sunk a little because I realized that that would mean there's a whole section of population that don't even get to have that experience. And she's, you know, specifically doing it to build confidence for people to be in the outdoors. And she can't even get the equipment to introduce that experience. And I remember someone saying to me, and I think this is pretty profound, you don't care about, you don't steward for things that you don't love. And it's hard to love things you don't know. So if all of these children and youth and, well, in Australia, we've got some great active senior program. If all of these people don't come into the outdoors, if they don't see it and they don't develop a relationship to being in natural environments, they'll never protect it. They'll never vote for the MP that's going to protect it. They won't read the policies about environmental sustainability. They won't, they won't steward in their own space. You know, they won't pick up the litter when they walk by, or the tiny minor, little actions that we do, up to the big influential, politically agended. We just don't do that stuff for the stuff we don't love. And hence why it's kind of heartbreaking to think that school children for an entire year haven't had an introduction. Because if they're not lucky enough to have a family that can do that for them, whether that's because their family doesn't have the love for it themselves, or the finances, or the access, or the voice, or then they never begin to love the environment that we so desperately need that generation to fight for, as much as we are trying to work for it too. So yeah, I'm hoping we're going to add to this literature and start breaking some of these myths up and making the spaces more open. I'll leave it there.
All right, Mandy, thank you so much. I'm going to turn this back over to Jeff for a moment, though, to follow up on the second question. Apparently, I was a little too quick on that, so I apologize. In the meantime, with the time we have left afterward, we're going to open it up to questions, so please pop those in the chat. Erin is monitoring that now. Thank you. Jeff, if you had more to contribute. Thank you.
I'll be brief, though. I really want to hear some of the questions and discussion and things like that. I think I didn't touch on the pandemic and kind of the social and environmental implications of that. And I think one of the things that we're seeing in the United States around that is just a massive influx of people going to public lands, and that's from everywhere, from urban municipal parks to semi, peri-urban parks that are just on the outside of cities, to some of our larger national forests, national parks, recreation areas, and things like that. And there's been some good research coming out of Penn State has partnered with Leave No Trace to provide some evidence of essentially how many people are increasing their participation in outdoor recreation during these times. But I don't think we've had much systematic work. And so I think one of the things that's really, I guess quite innovative with this is while park and protected areas have used for a number of years now, they've used things like vehicle strips to count cars coming in. They've used infrared counters to monitor the number of people on hiking trails and things like that. One of the things that we're seeing, and it's largely out of the University of Washington, Spencer Wood, although Matt Brownlee at Clemson University is doing some work on this as well, is using essentially the GPS devices that most people carry with them 24/7 to monitor use. And so this is a pretty interesting and novel way of understanding visitor use management, understanding the number of people who are in a park and protected area at a particular time. How long are they staying in that park and protected area? Are they lingering at an overlook to look at a waterfall, or are they lingering at a particular feature? Are they getting in their miles to do hiking or running or biking or some activity feature like that? And I think that's really interesting. And I think that plus the use of unmanned aerial vehicles or drones, I think the combination of those things are potentially game changers in terms of understanding how do researchers and how do managers understand who is in their area and how are they. And I think they're game changers, and we haven't really come to terms with the idea that we are being monitored pretty much 24/7, and we are consenting to that process. And I think that's an ethical consideration that we need to take quite seriously, as well as a practical implication for managers and things like that. Is just because you can do something, does that mean you should? I think these are things that I kind of feel like this is where our literature is going to be in 5 years from now in terms of talking about outdoor recreation and who is doing what where and some public land management, things like that. So yeah, just some quick thoughts.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. Fabulous discussion. Great content shared with everybody here. With that, Anna, are there questions in the chat that you wanted to open up to them?
Yes, thank you so much. And everybody, please do feel free to put more questions in the chat. We so far have 2 questions. So first one is for Jingyan. Can the temporary infrastructures from fracking be converted into recreation areas, maybe access road, etc.? Is West Virginia doing anything to change these coal mining towns into recreation hotspots?
Question. So actually, when I am getting prepared for this webinar, I do such literature, right? I think about a new term that we can use to describe a kind of a new relationship between energy, consumption, or coal mining, fraction, and recreation tourism. And I come up with one term, energy tourism. So, but actually, that term already created by somebody else. I found in the literature, so it's kind of coincidence because we have niche tourism, right? Like a dark tourism, like a western tourism, green tourism, but we should have something to describe this kind of a relationship between those kind of extractive economic activity and recreation. So now I like the term energy tourism. So in terms of fracking, how to convert fracking for tourism, but I am not aware of any kind of research or conversion, but not just for West Virginia, I think for many other parts of the world, right? We have a kind of how to use abundant a cool site, right? Or reclamation site for recreation for tourism. In West Virginia, we have very important heritage tourism related to coal mining. We have a national heritage coal trail, so that play a very important role to diversify local economy by attracting people to explore or the historical sites or get educated about the how coal mining get operated. So where that something like that. And actually, in Canada, in British Columbia, or in China, right, mining tourism, in Australia, it's kind of a very common thing that we link this kind of energy with recreation and tourism. It can promote our understanding of the heritage history, right? But it also can allow visitors to get educated. It may allow them to become more environmentally friendly, right? For a better understanding of the relationship between our home being and the environment. Yeah, that's a very good question. I hope through this webinar we will have more research on the linkage between energy and tourism. Energy tourism. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. Go ahead, Alex.
No, Sandro has his hand up. So
I just wanted to mention it's a very interesting question, and I actually have a personal experience with something like that. The interesting thing is coming from Brazil, there are many areas in Brazil that lack recreational infrastructure. Areas where kids, communities can use as a recreational facility. And it's quite common in areas in Brazil, including rural areas. And I remember that there was a mining place close to where my auntie used to live, and it was abandoned, right? So they extracted everything and they basically abandoned the mine there. And then the local community occupied the space, even if it was still private land, right, of the miners, but they basically just brought down and they occupied the space to use that mining spot for their own leisure and recreation. Obviously, that there are issues with that. There are public health issues with that need to be taken into consideration. But I just want to say, in terms of how it's coming from a country that is has issues in access to recreational facilities, how in many places local communities will use areas such as mining areas for the purpose of their own recreational activities. So I just wanted to share that personal experience.
Thank you so much. It's very helpful, definitely, for all of us to see how these issues resolve in different countries with different legislations and just different approaches to kind of access, right, to these spaces. Very interesting. So we have another question, and that's from let's see. From Carla Henderson. I appreciate the importance of examining social justice as well as it relates to outdoor recreation adventure, and how outdoor opportunities can be wonderful experiences as well as being exclusionary for some people. I'm also concerned about how outdoor recreation adventure impacts the environmental resources. Just by going into the outdoors, people can be contributing to environmental degradation by driving cars, ruining trails, etc., etc. So how do we encourage responsible consumers of outdoor recreation adventures and maintain the environments for the future? In other words, who will speak for the animals, the trees, and the land?
I just typed up a quick answer, but I'll say something along the same lines. And thank you, Carla. Absolutely. What a good point. That was sort of the missing link that I didn't articulate. That's part of why I'm so sad that the school camps, by and large, have been shut down in our country. School camps are a required part of curriculum. So all kids in Australia go to camp. And school camps spend a huge, generally speaking, have a good component of environmental care and stewardship. So what that means is those practices of being in the outdoors respectfully and caring for the outdoors, in some, even if it's in some small way, at the very least is presented to most children in this country. So you're right, the COVID has kind of sent people off wandering into the woods, but without necessarily the skills or understanding. I know, a certain degree of ignorance about what they need to do to make sure the bush is there for next time. And that's part of why I'm just so sad that the organized outdoor recreation has, had its doors shut for almost a year.
I just want to comment that I think you used an interesting word there, Mandy, which is the word of care, right? And I'm actually, well, we are recording this, so I can make sure that no one plagiarizes me in the future because it's recorded. I'm telling that first. But we are developing a concept for tourism, more specifically about, well, everyone talks about carrying capacity. So it's the capacity that the land on the environment has of, welcoming a certain numbers of visitors. So we're talking about now developing the idea of carrying capacity, of how much we can develop the concept of care in people, right? Because the problem of carrying capacity as the volume of people is for many years based on economic lenses of policymakers. Well, now what we really need, and that's because of climate change and because of changes in the environment and the impacts on communities, impacts on people and so on, is how we can then embed the concept of carrying capacity, where actually when we go to do something like that, we understand that whatever we do, as you say, we're going to have an impact on the environment potentially, or potentially on the people, or potentially the community, or so on. And it's how you develop that caring towards the activities that we do in recreation, in leisure, in tourism, and so on.
I'll just quickly respond, and I agree very much with, I really like Sandro and Mandy's perspective on this, and very much appreciate the question from Dr. Henderson. I guess maybe I'll just flip the question a little bit and say that there's impacts where we're seeing things like trail degradation and probably a little bit of increased litter, and maybe some crowding of some places that were traditionally a little bit less crowded. Those are concerning, and I think our land managers and people like that, and some educational programs have the potential to really make some impact there. But I think we should see this ultimately as a sign of our political moment, and that this should be a positive sign for our political moment. I'll present a United States perspective here, and that we are kind of emerging from one political administration to another. And I think during this time, one of the things that we're seeing from kind of both sides of the aisle is an interest in moving forward, particularly in areas of large environmental concern. So not necessarily trail conditions or crowding in a state park or something like that, but issues like the environment, climate change, species loss, large-scale degradation, things like that. We in the United States are seeing movement from both sides of the aisle towards an acceptance that those things are truly happening. And there's still some disagreement over what to do, or how quickly to do it, or how much money to support these kinds of things. But there's generally widespread acceptance of these things. And so in some ways, I see issues of crowding as kind of the dawn of a new politics. A politics that recognizes and acknowledges the role of an environmental agenda that maybe isn't quite as polarized as it has been in the recent past. And so, within the frustration, I think there's also room for optimism.
Without much repetition of what Jeff just said, I want to add something about who care about trees, animals, and rivers. I agree. So we as recreationist tourists, right? We are able to make this happen by lobbying the politicians, right? By voice our voice for policy making for a good regulation, or most strict regulation on this kind of attractive economic activities across America. So at least responses from distrust, right? In terms of how to look at those kind of activities like fracking, coal mining, we can use that as a smoking gun, right, to influence, right, senators or other politicians to make a policy that more environmentally friendly. So the new administration, the Biden administration has banned, right, temporarily like fracking activity within the federal land. I think that is a good sign, right? The federal government should play a key role in this kind of thing. Even the way in my class I said, it's everyone's responsibility, right, for sustainability. But I would say government can play a essential role in regulating those kinds of economic activities and make our environment better.
I love some hopeful message there, with all the changes, hopefully we're going to see positive impact for our legislation and our political influence on really kind of bringing attention to the issue. Wonderful. So we have 2 more questions from, one is from Rich McGrath, and his question is, what challenges, opportunities have panelists had in relation to teaching research pressures within the university sector due to impact of COVID?
I'll address it quickly. I think the biggest pressure that I've seen and felt is the necessity to attend to students' mental health. I think that's not unique to students, although I do think students have some unique needs there. I think the amount of my time and focus within the classroom or within the teaching relationship that's going towards supporting students in their mental health during this time has been pretty substantial, and it's ongoing. Like it was certainly that way in mid-March, and it's certainly that way in January as well. So I think that's been a big area of impact in my life.
It's difficult to answer the question without going into a wider, I think, political debate about higher education, I think. So the situation in UK is quite bad, to be honest, in terms of higher education, neoliberal agendas, and cutting of programs. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the programs that are involved with outdoor recreation, leisure studies, and so on, have been slowly disappearing from the country. Most of you probably know Heather Prince from University of Cumbria. Huge, like one of the most important outdoor education programs in UK. Struggling with decisions from the university and in other parts of the country as well. So I think it is a difficult time. COVID brought a lot of problems due to the neoliberal agenda of international students and the monetization that international students would bring to compensate lack of government funding. And then we see that impacting hugely in the programs that we teach. And that's a reality in UK just now.
Anybody else wants to add? No? Okay, so we have 2 more questions. So next question is from Karzina Emin. And its question is, in brief, what are the sources of information in your countries for those new fans after a pandemic of outdoor recreation? How people know which areas to choose for their outdoor discovery trips, and how are they motivated to visit a particular area? And that's a question for all.
I can go quick. In the United States, increasingly a number of states, one of the 50 states, each of the 50 states have a statewide Office of Recreation. And that's certainly not a comprehensive guidepost, but I do think that it's a good place to start. And so for folks, particularly, who don't have, maybe English as a second language here in the United States, or aren't familiar with outdoor recreation, I think that's a good place to start. And many of our states are developing a plan to support people exactly like what you've described. And a number of the states even have things like a children's outdoor bill of rights, which basically says, hey, every child deserves these 10 things: hike in a creek, catch a fish, see the stars at night, things like that. And so I think our state governments are offering some of that. But there's lots of other areas within municipal governments and elsewhere.
Australia is very similar. We have a federal national parks kind of organization, and they do some fairly good publicity or communication around that. We also have state. We also have state on top of that. And then I think Australia is somewhat known for its outdoor spaces, anything from the Great Barrier Reef to the middle of the desert. Like we are known for it. So tourism really capitalizes. And that's probably where the most kind of promotion, really intensive promotion comes from, is from the tourism functioning of both government and private entities that push pretty hard, both internationally and domestically. And especially after COVID, the domestic tourism campaigns have ratcheted up quite a bit. We've had state lockdowns, so we can't leave our state, or sometimes even smaller geographical areas. And what that's meant is there's been a lot of campaigns and a lot of uptake of explore your own backyard. So, I live in the Blue Mountains. We are flooded. I live in a tourist town. I almost hate it because I can't get a park in my little tiny town on the weekends, and I don't even like going into town in the weekends. There's just so many people. And obviously in COVID restrictions, that was kind of the opposite of what we wanted to achieve. So I have a tendency to stay out of town then. But because of that, between tourism and state government and private entities, I think a lot of that's fairly well signaled. People have also capitalized on this moment to produce a lot more walking guides or natural tourism kind of guides. So we've got one on our coffee table. We gave it out to everybody at Christmas this year because we know them, they're local, and we like promoting our local entities. But yeah, so it's communicated well, but I would say, as always, to the people who are in the know. So you either need to be on that group on Facebook, or you need to have an already interest in the outdoors to tap into a lot of those resources.
And Scotland as well, I think the whole narrative of domestic tourism and visiting the background is being very, very exciting one side, because knowing my students here, and most of my students are Scottish students, it's interesting how they don't know much about Scotland, so that I can actually develop some curiosity, and the volume of people that start to uptake hill walking, for example, is incredible. So, and a lot of them promoted by local councils or destination management organizations, and always emphasizing the importance of outdoors for mental health, for example, as being a huge narrative that we've seen from the government in Scotland to encourage people to visit the national parks and the natural areas we have in the country.
This might be an odd segue, and I apologize if we do this. I just get excited about ideas. But recently, and Erin's actually on the call, Erin and her co-authors chapter that came in for my editing really made me think harder and longer about the notion or the discourse of mental health. Or mental health benefit from the outdoors. It's not to say that isn't possible, or it isn't very well documented that there are benefits for mental health for being in the outdoors. But sometimes we get so caught up in justifying the value of outdoor experience that we get caught into a loop or a discourse of benefit and benefit only. And I think sometimes we forget that we are actually recreation or leisure, that we do these things for the pleasure of doing them, not because it will get us an outcome, or it's gonna train these kids to be the best politicians for the future. Don't get me wrong, I want them to love the outdoors when they are politicians in the future. I want them to change policy. I want them to care more. But I think we also, it was really refreshing, a number of authors that were writing, and I got the pleasure of editing. It really is such a fun job because you get to see all these different thoughts and think these things. But just that reminder of there's such pleasure in just being in the outdoors, just embodying it letting it be, sensual, using your senses and just truly being there. And that's not to say these other discourses aren't important, but let's keep the leisure back in the conversation too.
Perfect. And we have a question from Erin, and I believe it's also for all panelists. What's an accepted belief in the field of outdoor recreation that you'd really like to disrupt?
That was mine. I'm going to claim it. That was mine already. I got ahead of it.
I would say I'll link to probably maybe what Jeff was talking before. I would claim that one of the things that I would like to demystify is the idea that outdoor recreation is inclusive and for all. I don't think it is. I don't think it's fair to claim that. You know, when you look to social injustices, when you look to you know, levels of deprivation, you know, it's very easy to claim that outdoor is free and is there for everyone, when it's not as simplistic. So I think for me that would be a point.
I think mine is similar. I think, you know, one thing, I'm working on a project with a colleague of mine, and she and I we're tasked with understanding diversity in the outdoors, you know, diversity, whatever that means, and all of its complications and things like that. And one of the things that I'm increasingly, I guess, questioning, or at least kind of rolling around in my mind, is everybody, including me, says that we need to make outdoor recreation more diverse. We need to make it more inclusive, and we need to make it, you know, more equitable. And I honestly do believe that. The question is why. Why do we need to do that? And if we need to do it because we believe in something like the democratization of recreation and environmental sustainability and things like that, that to me seems like a pretty good rationale. I think one of my concerns is that one of the reasons that I'm speaking as a white male able-bodied person here from the United States, and one of my concerns is that we want outdoor recreation to be more diverse to make me feel better about the activities that I'm already doing. I like to go hiking and running and climbing and biking and skiing and things like that. And gosh, if I saw more diverse people, then that would make me feel better about my continued hiking and biking and running and climbing and all this kind of stuff. And that honestly, it feels a little cynical to feel that way. And yet I'm curious if that's the case. And so I think one of the things that I would like to demystify is, why do we want diversity? And I don't know if that's a mystification or if that's a just like an open research question that I think we need to confront as a discipline and as practitioners and participants in outdoor recreation as well.
I would say outdoor recreation is a means to facilitate or promote self-transformation. So we do activity, we go hiking, fishing, not just for the activity itself. We are doing kind of transforming ourselves psychologically, so to a higher level of actualization. So outdoor recreation is a way to foster environmental stewardship, to promote our understanding about our relationship between human and nature, and can increase our responsibility for the sustainability of our location, of our area, of our nation, and then the whole planet. So I think recreation is not just for recreation itself. It's kind of philosophy. So I want to raise it to a lofty idea for self-transformation. Yeah, but of course, diversity is also very important, right? We should encourage provision of opportunity for a diverse group with different racial or cultural background. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we have one more question. And the question is, do you think fine is a good method to protect the environment when people travel in some national parks and outdoor recreation site? I assume it means when this is done, maybe, you know, in a places or at times when it's maybe not allowed.
Interesting question. So we applying penalties to people's behavior to force them to do right thing. So I would say sometimes fine is necessary, right? But long term, it's not good way. So.
I personally think we need to look in a more complex way for, if I think if we want to really protect the environment and if we really need to protect national parks, we need to really look to complex policies, public policy, educational elements. I think it's, I wouldn't like to reduce such a complex topic into a simple punishment of fines. I will prefer to see a wider public policy in terms of education and strategic management of outdoor recreational resources, leisure time, that would make people care and go back to the idea of caring.
I'm thrilled with this idea of caring, Sandro. So you got to get it to print in a hurry. Come on, giddy up. A lot of my work has been in emotion, like Sandro's work, and that's why I use the word. People don't usually behave differently unless they care about a thing, and I don't think fines make people care. In fact, you know, if we look at some of our research around relations of power and how power is negotiated, fining is like a red flag to some folks. That's a challenge. Fining doesn't shape behavior, it's punitive. It doesn't shape behavior in a way that's long lasting and that is sustainable. So while it might be effective in a short term, it might raise the funds we need to do other things. It's that notion of care, and that's where, like Sandra said, it gets really complex, and even that question of how do you make someone care? How do you engender a caring attitude, a truly genuine caring? And I think that certainly, like this interdisciplinary approach, we really have to dig into some very creative pedagogical approaches. We need to get away even from the sort of like chalk and talk notion of teaching, because care is, you know, engaging emotion is a much more complex kind of learning experience.
Wonderful. And we have just one more comment. So thank you all. Interesting debate and relevance of caring approach on top of implications from pandemic. We care for people, we care for places as well. I particularly like making outdoors relevant to a much wider range of people in this caring context. And so we have about 5 minutes left. So in 1 minute, if you wanted to leave us with some message, what would it be?
I would say research on the impact of outdoor recreation, it's very limited, right? Compared to the research on the impact of outdoor recreation tourism on the environment. Now to this topic, we focus on how environmental issues can affect recreation tourism, right? But actually, we have to talk a lot about how our behavioral recreation tourism have affected environment. So hopefully, this webinar will draw more attention to this research gap and stimulate more research or international collaboration to look at relationship between like, environment issues and outdoor recreation. And we may end up with kind of international collaboration to do something big at landscape level, right? Like more collaborators or more researchers with different expertise. So, and we could get our results more convincing, more comparable. So that's what I want to say. Thanks.
I can go next if you guys want. I would say that for me, a final message would be to really think about outdoor recreation as something that cannot be dissociated for environmental protection and outdoor education. So I think that we cannot think anymore about outdoor recreation without thinking about education and without thinking about environmental protection. I think we had enough of thinking about outdoor education only as a economic value or only as a product to a limited perspective. I think without environmental protection and without education, outdoor recreation becomes a dangerous tool.
I'll go next just because my comment is quite similar to Sandro's, which is maybe a little broader, which is to add on to what he just said, that I'm increasingly convinced that outdoor recreation, environmental conservation, protection, support, stewardship, all of those kinds of things, they cannot be a politics that exist on their own. So they exist within a broader framework of politics. And I'm increasingly convinced that those are incompatible with capitalism. And so, if we are going to maintain a profit motive in large segments of our society, I think we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. And so, I guess I would encourage us to be involved in promoting outdoor recreation, promoting conservation, stewardship locally, nationally, internationally, but also working in a number of other political avenues as well. This is a small slice of a pie that can't be separated from those other slices.
Well, that's a perfect setup for what I want to add. Thanks, guys. I think it was Johnson and Perry was writing about something they called a politics of hope. They weren't talking about outdoor recreation. They were talking about research methodologies when they said that. But I guess this sunny disposition isn't a mistake or naivety. It's a choice to go into this work, which is broad and complex and political and challenging, but with a belief that we can crack it open. Whether or not we get all the way, if we get all the work done, is not really the question. I think we will constantly be oscillating into these highly political, very challenging, complex questions about the environment and how we care for it and how we're caring, as well as how we engage with it through our recreation and leisure. But I think it's work that needs to be done with a belief that it is achievable, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is that politics of hope, that I can get into this work and I can call on colleagues all over the world to engage in and tell the story differently and ask for the story to be different. And that through those practices that we will actually shift those things and make those changes, even if it's incremental, towards a more caring, complex social and environmental space. So yeah, a politics of hope. That's my angle.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It is 5:30 sharp, so we really greatly appreciate this wonderful discussion. It truly is a global issue, and I hope that today, we generated some good ideas for research, for publications, for some hopeful thinking. Our next webinar is going to take place on March 5th, and we actually invited a lot of new new scholars and kind of people in very young in their careers, PhD students, and first few years in an academic job. So we'll see what hopeful message delivered to us. Please join us. And thank you again to all the panelists for your amazing presentations and making us think about this very complex issue. And thank you all the audience for helping us to lead this discussion with Lexi. Thank you all, and enjoy your rest of the day or night, wherever you are.
It's lovely to see you all, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.